Why is Venezuela much poorer than USA? Hello and welcome to today's video. But before we dive into that, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new video. And if you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Venezuela and the USA are two countries with very different economic and political histories, cultures, and institutions. Comparing their levels of wealth and development is not a simple task, as there are many factors that influence the economic performance and well-being of a nation. However, some of the main reasons why Venezuela is much poorer than the USA are: 1. Venezuela has suffered from political instability, corruption, and authoritarianism for decades, which have undermined the rule of law, the protection of property rights, and the quality of public services and infrastructure. The USA, on the other hand, has a long tradition of democracy, checks and balances, and civil liberties, which have fostered a more conducive environment for entrepreneurship, innovation, and investment. 2. Venezuela has relied heavily on oil exports as its main source of income, which have made it vulnerable to external shocks and price fluctuations. The USA, by contrast, has a more diversified and resilient economy, with a strong industrial base, a dynamic service sector, and a leading role in global trade and finance. 3. Venezuela has failed to implement sound macroeconomic policies, resulting in chronic inflation, fiscal deficits, debt crises, and currency devaluations. The USA, despite some challenges and imbalances, has maintained a relatively stable and credible monetary and fiscal framework, which has preserved its economic stability and international reputation. 4. Venezuela has neglected its human capital development, with low levels of education, health, and social protection. The USA, in contrast, has invested heavily in its human capital, with high standards of education, healthcare, and social security, which have enhanced its productivity and competitiveness. These are some of the main factors that explain why Venezuela is much poorer than the USA. But there are many others that could be explored in more depth. The gap between the two countries is not inevitable or irreversible, but it requires significant reforms and transformations in both the economic and political spheres to narrow it. What is the current situation in Venezuela? Venezuela is facing a severe economic and social crisis, with high levels of poverty, inequality, violence, and migration. The country is in the midst of an unprecedented social and humanitarian collapse, the result of bad economic policies and political conflict that has led to food insecurity, the second largest migration crisis in the world, and regional instability. The economy has collapsed, and an uprising of political opposition to President Nicolas Maduro has put the country's leadership in question. More than 7 million refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants from Venezuela have left the country seeking food, work, and a better life. The international community has responded with pressure against the regime coupled with support for elements of the opposition. But to date it has been unsuccessful in bringing about a positive change. Many experts now believe that the path to redemocratization involves a lengthy negotiation process leading to free and fair presidential elections and the rebuilding of democratic institutions. It must be based on an agreement for coexistence between all political actors and include Venezuelan civil society. Many Venezuelan civic and political leaders are supportive of this course and seek to exert their influence to bring it about. International actors will also be essential players, from a respectful distance and at the appropriate time. The current situation in Venezuela is complex and challenging, with multiple dimensions and actors involved. It requires a comprehensive and inclusive approach that addresses the root causes of the crisis and the urgent needs of the people. It also requires a vision for Venezuela's future that can inspire hope and trust among all Venezuelans. What is the root cause of the crisis in Venezuela? Venezuela's crisis has multiple and interrelated causes, but one of the main ones is the country's dependence on oil revenues and the mismanagement of its economy. Venezuela has the world's largest crude oil reserves, and oil exports account for 96% of its foreign income and 25% of its GDP. This makes Venezuela's economy very vulnerable to external shocks and price fluctuations. When oil prices were high, the socialist governments of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro used the oil revenues to fund massive social spending and subsidies, without diversifying the economy or saving for the future. When oil prices collapsed in 2014, Venezuela's income plummeted, and the government faced a fiscal crisis. Instead of adjusting its policies, the government resorted to printing money to cover its deficits, which led to a decline in production and exports. The combination of these factors resulted in a collapse of economic activity, a loss of purchasing power, and a scarcity of basic goods and services. Another root cause of the crisis is the political conflict and authoritarianism that have undermined democracy and human rights in Venezuela. Chavez and Maduro have faced opposition from various sectors of society, including political parties, civil society groups, media outlets, and business leaders. Instead of engaging in dialogue and respecting pluralism, they have tried to suppress dissent and consolidate power. They have used the judiciary, the military, and the electoral council to harass, intimidate, imprison, or disqualify their opponents. They have also manipulated the constitution and the electoral system to extend their terms in office and create parallel institutions that bypass the National Assembly, where the opposition won a majority in 2015. They have also accused the opposition of waging an economic war, backed by the United States, and have blamed external forces for their own failures. The political confrontation has polarized the country and increased violence and repression. The root causes of Venezuela's crisis are complex and interrelated, but they can be summarized as follows. A dependence on oil revenues that made the economy vulnerable to external shocks. A mismanagement of the economy that led to hyperinflation, shortages, and recession. A political conflict that eroded democracy and human rights. And a lack of dialogue and cooperation among different actors that prevented a peaceful solution to the crisis. What is the economic situation in Venezuela now? Venezuela's economic situation remains dire, despite some signs of recovery in 2022. The country is still suffering from hyperinflation, recession, shortages, and debt. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Venezuela's gross domestic product, GDP, shrank by roughly 3/4 PDF between 2014 and 2021. However, the economy grew by an estimated 6% in 2022, and experts forecast additional growth of 6.5% in 2023. The growth is mainly driven by the partial recovery of oil production and exports, which increased from 0.5 million barrels per day in 2020 to 0.8 million barrels per day in 2022, thanks to the easing of U.S. sanctions and the cooperation with foreign partners such as Iran and Russia. However, oil output is still far below the pre-crisis level of 2.4 million barrels per day in 2014. And the oil sector remains underinvested and mismanaged. Inflation remains extremely high, although it has slowed down from its peak of 10% million in 2019. The IMF estimates that inflation was 2,300% in 2021, and projects it will be 1,600% in 2022 and 1,000% in 2023. The government has tried to control inflation by introducing a new currency, the sovereign bolivar, in 2018, and by implementing a series of minimum wage hikes and price controls. However, these measures have failed to restore confidence in the currency, or to prevent the widespread use of foreign currencies, especially the US dollar. According to a study by Eco-Analytica, a local consultancy firm, more than 80% of transactions in Venezuela were made in foreign currency in 2021. Shortages of food, medicine, and other basic goods continue to affect millions of Venezuelans, who struggle to afford them or to find them in the market. The government has tried to alleviate the situation by importing goods from allied countries such as China, Cuba, Iran, and Turkey, and by distributing subsidized food boxes through a program called CLAP, Local Committees for Supply and Production. However, these efforts have been insufficient and plagued by corruption and inefficiency. According to the UN World Food Programme, WFP, about 1/3 of Venezuelans are food insecure and need urgent assistance. The WFP launched its first operation in Venezuela in April 2021. aiming to reach 1.5 million children by the end of 2023. The health system is also collapsing, with shortages of medicines, equipment, and personnel. The COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the situation, with more than 400,000 confirmed cases and over 5,000 deaths as of August 2023. The vaccination campaign has been slow and uneven, with only about 20% of the population fully vaccinated as of August 2023. Venezuela is also facing a severe debt crisis, with an external debt estimated at $150 billion as of June 2021. The country has defaulted on most of its debt payments since 2017, and faces multiple lawsuits from creditors and bondholders. The government has sought debt relief from some of its allies, such as China and Russia, but has not reached an agreement with the IMF or other multilateral lenders. The U.S. sanctions have also hampered Venezuela's access to international financing and assets. In June 2021, the U.S. Treasury Department extended a license that protects Citgo, a U.S.-based subsidiary of Venezuela's state-owned oil company Phan-USA, from creditors until October 2023. Citgo is one of Venezuela's most valuable assets abroad, and a source of revenue for the opposition-led National Assembly. Venezuela's economic situation is still critical and uncertain, despite some positive indicators in 2022. The country needs urgent reforms and assistance to overcome its multiple challenges, and to improve the living conditions of its people. What is the inflation rate in Venezuela now? Venezuela's inflation rate is one of the highest in the world, reflecting the severe economic crisis and the loss of confidence in the national currency. According to the Central Bank of Venezuela, BCV, the annual consumer price inflation was recorded at 155.8% in October 2022, one of the highest rates across the globe. The BCV has not published official data for 2023, but according to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the inflation rate is projected to be 399.98% in 2023 and 199.98% in 2024. These estimates are based on assumptions and projections that may change depending on the economic and political situation in the country. The main causes of inflation in Venezuela are the excessive money supply, the depreciation of the bolivar, the scarcity of goods and services, and the widespread use of foreign currencies. The government has tried to control inflation by introducing a new currency, the sovereign bolivar, in 2018, and by implementing a series of minimum wage hikes and price controls. However, these measures have failed to restore confidence in the currency, or to prevent the widespread use of foreign currencies, especially the US dollar. According to a study by Eco-Analytica, a local consultancy firm, more than 80% of transactions in Venezuela were made in foreign currency in 2021. The high inflation rate has eroded the purchasing power of Venezuelans, who struggle to afford basic goods and services. The inflation rate also affects other economic indicators, such as GDP growth, unemployment, poverty, and debt. The high inflation rate is one of the main challenges that Venezuela faces to overcome its economic crisis, and to improve the living conditions of its people. How can Venezuela improve? Venezuela is facing a severe economic and social crisis, with high levels of poverty, inequality, violence, and migration. The country needs urgent and comprehensive reforms to overcome its challenges and achieve a more prosperous and democratic future. Some of the possible steps that Venezuela could take to improve are: restore democracy and the rule of law by holding free and fair elections, respecting human rights and civil liberties, and fighting corruption and impunity. A legitimate and accountable government is essential to restore trust and confidence among the citizens and the international community. Diversify the economy and promote sustainable development by reducing dependence on oil exports, fostering private sector